The harsh wind carried the infant's wail across the barren Montana landscape, piercing through Elizabeth Porter's breaking heart as she knelt in the dirt beside her broken wagon wheel. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving frontier had dealt her yet another cruel hand. Her trembling fingers clutched her 6-month-old daughter Emma closer to her chest, but the baby continued to cry, hungry and uncomfortable under the merciless summer sun. "Hush now, my sweet," Elizabeth whispered, her throat dry from thirst and desperation. "Someone will come. Someone must come." But the dusty road stretched empty in both directions, and the nearest town was still a day's journey ahead. The distant thunder of hoofbeats caused Elizabeth to stiffen, her protective instincts flaring. Out here, strangers could mean salvation or danger. She'd heard enough stories of bandits and outlaws to know that a woman alone with a child made an easy target. Yet she had no choice but to stand her ground. The rider appeared over the hill, silhouetted against the burning sky, tall and broad-shouldered atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. Elizabeth clutched Emma tighter as the stranger approached, slowing his horse to a walk. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep but gentle. He tipped his hat back, revealing a sun-weathered face with kind blue eyes that stood in stark contrast to his rugged appearance. "Looks like you've found yourself in a spot of trouble." "Our wheel broke," Elizabeth explained, trying to quiet Emma's persistent cries. "My husband—" The words caught in her throat. How could she explain that James was 3 months dead, buried in a hasty grave after pneumonia took him? That she was traveling to her sister's home in Helena with nothing but a trunk of belongings and dwindling hopes? The man dismounted with fluid grace, despite his imposing height. He knelt to inspect the broken wagon wheel, his movements measured and careful. "Name's Ethan Thornton," he said, without looking up. "I've got some skill with repairs." "Elizabeth Porter," she replied, bouncing Emma gently. "And this is Emma." As if sensing the newcomer's presence, Emma's cries grew louder. Elizabeth felt tears of frustration and embarrassment burn her eyes. "I'm sorry, she's hungry and tired. We've been stranded here since midday." Ethan straightened, dusting off his hands on worn denim pants. His gaze settled on the crying infant, and something in his expression softened. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Emma. Hesitation flickered across Elizabeth's face, but desperation won out. She carefully handed her daughter to the stranger, watching anxiously as his large, calloused hands enveloped her tiny bundle. To her astonishment, Ethan cradled Emma with unexpected tenderness, rocking her with the ease of someone who had done this before. "Hey there, little lady," he murmured, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble. "That's quite a set of lungs you've got." Emma's cries began to subside as she stared up at the bearded face looming over her. One tiny hand reached up, grasping at his bandana. Ethan looked at Elizabeth, taking in her exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged under invisible weights. "Her baby cried alone by the road," he said softly, almost to himself. Then, with conviction that seemed to surprise even him, he added, "Then I'll be the one to hold you both." The unexpected declaration hung in the air between them. Elizabeth blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "What I mean," Ethan clarified, a hint of color rising beneath his tanned skin, "is that I'll help you get to wherever you're headed. That wheel needs more than a quick fix, and these parts aren't safe for a woman and child alone." Relief washed over Elizabeth, though something else stirred beneath it, something she wasn't ready to examine. "We're bound for Helena. My sister Sarah lives there." "That's a 3-day ride from here," Ethan noted, still gently rocking Emma, who had miraculously fallen silent in his arms. "I know a place about 5 miles ahead. Small trading post run by a good man and his wife. They'll put us up for the night, and I can work on your wagon come morning." "Us?" Elizabeth questioned. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and resolute. I won't leave you out here, Mrs. Porter. That wouldn't sit right with me. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Elizabeth found herself perched beside Ethan on his horse, Emma secured in a makeshift sling across her chest, while he led her horse pulling the damaged wagon. The proximity to this stranger was unsettling, yet oddly comforting. His body was solid and warm behind her, his arms creating a protective circle as he held the reins. "You've got a knack with children," Elizabeth observed as they rode. "Do you have little ones of your own?" A moment of silence followed, heavy enough that she regretted asking. "I had a sister," he finally said, 8 years younger. "Practically raised her after our ma passed." The past tense wasn't lost on Elizabeth. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Been 5 years now. Fever took her and her husband both. Their boy, too. Just a few months old." His voice remained steady, but Elizabeth felt the slight tension in his body. "That's why you stopped," she realized. "Because of Emma." His silence was answer enough. The trading post appeared as twilight descended a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by a sturdy fence. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main structure, and lanterns glowed in the windows. A dog barked, announcing their arrival. The owner, Samuel Watson, emerged with a shotgun that he quickly lowered upon recognizing Ethan. "Thornton, wasn't expecting to see you this season. Thought you'd be up north with the Callahan outfit." "Change of plans, Sam," Ethan replied, helping Elizabeth dismount. "Mrs. Porter and her daughter need shelter for the night. Wagon threw a wheel a few miles back." Samuel's wife Martha appeared in the doorway, her curious expression warming at the sight of Emma. "Well, don't keep them standing in the yard. Bring them in. Poor child must be starving." The trading post's living quarters were simple but clean. Martha fussed over Emma, producing goat's milk they kept for a similar emergency. Elizabeth nearly wept with gratitude as her daughter eagerly accepted the nourishment. "Where's your husband, dear?" Martha asked, the innocent question landing like a physical blow. "He died this past winter," Elizabeth answered, the words still feeling strange on her tongue. "I'm traveling to my sister's home." Martha's face softened with understanding. "You'll stay with us until your wagon's fixed. No arguments now." That night, lying on a borrowed pallet with Emma finally sleeping peacefully beside her, Elizabeth listened to the low murmur of men's voices from the next room. She couldn't make out the words, but something in Ethan's tone, earnest, determined, made her wonder what path had brought him to that lonely road today, and what providence had placed him there just when she needed help most. Morning brought the scent of coffee and bacon. Elizabeth emerged from the small back room to find Ethan already at work on her wagon wheel, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He worked with focused precision, barely noticing her approach with Emma on her hip. "You're an early riser," she commented. He glanced up, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her hair loose around her shoulders, cheeks flushed from sleep. "Habit from ranch life. Sun up means work's already waiting." "You're a rancher, then?" Ethan returned to his work, hammering with controlled strength. "Was. Worked the Callahan spread north of here for 5 years. Before that, drove cattle from Texas to Kansas. Before that," he shrugged. "Bit of everything." "And now?" His hands stilled momentarily. "Now I'm heading to Oregon Territory. Heard there's land for the claiming. Good land." He looked up at her, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. Elizabeth felt a flutter of something like panic. This man was still a stranger, despite his kindness. "We couldn't impose on you further. Once the wagon's repaired—" "It's no imposition," he cut in. "Helena's not far from my route." Before she could respond, Martha called them for breakfast. The meal passed pleasantly, with Samuel regaling them with local news and Martha cooing over Emma. Elizabeth found herself watching Ethan the careful way he ate, how he thanked Martha with genuine appreciation, the respect in his voice when addressing Samuel. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior. By midday, the wagon wheel was repaired. "Good as new," Ethan declared, helping Samuel load Elizabeth's belongings back into the wagon. "How much do I owe you?" Elizabeth asked, reaching for the small purse containing her meager savings. Ethan shook his head firmly. "Nothing. I can't accept charity," she insisted, pride stiffening her spine. His blue eyes held hers steadily. "It's not charity. It's—" He seemed to search for the right words. "It's what decent folks do." Martha pressed a bundle of food into Elizabeth's hands. "For the journey," she insisted, "and you come back through if you're ever this way again." As they prepared to leave, Samuel pulled Ethan aside. Elizabeth couldn't hear their conversation, but she noticed how Samuel clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a fatherly gesture that made her wonder about Ethan's own past. They set out under clear skies, Ethan riding alongside the wagon. Emma, content after a night of proper rest and regular feeding, babbled happily in Elizabeth's lap. The miles stretched before them, but the journey no longer felt as daunting with Ethan's solid presence nearby. "Tell me about your sister," Ethan said after a comfortable silence. "The one in Helena. Sarah's 3 years my junior," Elizabeth replied, smiling at thoughts of her sister. "She married a shopkeeper named William Phillips. They have 2 boys." She hesitated. "She doesn't know I'm coming. I wrote after James died, but I'm not certain my letter reached her." "And if it didn't?" The question hung heavy between them. "Then I'll find work," Elizabeth said with more confidence than she felt. "I was a schoolteacher before I married. Perhaps Helena needs one." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Brave woman. Desperate woman," she corrected, then wished she hadn't revealed so much. "There's a fine line between the two," he said quietly. "I've walked it myself." They made camp that evening by a small creek. Ethan built a fire with practiced efficiency, then disappeared into the gathering dusk, returning with 2 rabbits he'd snared. He prepared them without fuss, the skill evident in his quick, clean movements. "You've lived rough before," Elizabeth observed as he turned the meat over the flames. A half smile touched his lips. "More often than not. War ended when I was 17, came home to Texas to find not much left, took to the trail, learned what I needed to survive. The war took much from many," Elizabeth said softly, thinking of her own father who never returned from Gettysburg. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and night sounds creating a cocoon of unexpected intimacy. Emma slept peacefully in a nest of blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling in the firelight. "She looks like you," Ethan commented, his gaze on the sleeping infant. "Everyone says she has her father's eyes," Elizabeth replied, a familiar ache spreading through her chest. James would have been such a wonderful father. The tears came suddenly, surprising her with their intensity. She turned away, embarrassed. Ethan said nothing, but she felt him move beside her. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, offering silent comfort. Elizabeth found herself leaning into his strength, just for a moment. "Sorry," she whispered, straightening. "It comes in waves still." "No need for apologies," he said, his voice low and kind. "Grief's a wild horse can't be tamed, only ridden until it tires." The poetic wisdom from this rugged cowboy startled her. "That's a good way of putting it." His hand retreated, but his presence remained close, steadying. "Get some rest, Elizabeth. I'll keep watch." She wanted to protest that it wasn't necessary, but exhaustion pulled at her limbs. Within minutes of settling into her bedroll, sleep claimed her. The next 2 days passed in similar fashion, riding during daylight hours, making camp at dusk. Elizabeth found herself growing accustomed to Ethan's quiet strength, his considerate gestures, the way he always ensured she and Emma were comfortable before seeing to his own needs. They talked about small things, memories of childhood, stories of places they'd seen, hopes carefully phrased to avoid revealing too much vulnerability. On the third day, as they crested a hill, Helena came into view in the valley below a sprawling town with sturdy buildings and the distant smoke of industry. "Your sister's place, you know where to find it?" Ethan asked, pulling his horse alongside the wagon. Elizabeth nodded, a mixture of relief and unexpected regret washing over her. "William's shop is on Main Street. Phillips General Goods." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a shuddering, a retreat. "I'll see you safely there." The streets of Helena bustled with afternoon activity. Elizabeth felt suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance as townsfolk cast curious glances at their small procession. Emma, sensing the change in atmosphere, began to fuss. Phillips General Goods appeared ahead, a handsome two-story building with large display windows. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. What if Sarah had moved? What if they couldn't accommodate her? Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could smell the leather and pine scent of him. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." His expression softened. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you know, Elizabeth Porter." The shop door opened and a woman's voice called out in disbelief. "Lizzie? Is that really you?" Sarah stood on the threshold, her familiar face a balm to Elizabeth's weary soul. Behind her appeared a tall man with a kind face, William, Elizabeth presumed. "Oh, Sarah!" Elizabeth cried, hurrying forward with Emma. The sisters embraced, careful of the baby between them. "I wasn't sure my letter had reached you." "It did, just last week. We've been worried sick, wondering when you might arrive." Sarah pulled back, her eyes widening at the sight of Emma. "And this must be my niece." "Oh, Lizzie, she's beautiful." William stepped forward, extending a hand to Ethan. "William Phillips, we're much obliged to you for escorting my sister-in-law." Ethan shook his hand firmly. Ethan Thornton was heading this way anyhow. Elizabeth turned, suddenly afraid he would disappear without a proper goodbye. "Ethan, please, you must stay for supper at least. Let us repay some of your kindness." Something like longing flashed across his features before he shook his head. "Best be moving on. Daylight to burn still." "Nonsense," William interjected. "Any man who's helped my family is welcome here. We've plenty of room, and I insist you join us tonight. Your horse could use the rest too. I'd wager." Elizabeth held her breath as Ethan hesitated, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. Something passed between them, unspoken but tangible. "One night," he finally conceded. "Much obliged." Sarah and William's home above the shop was comfortable and well-appointed, a testament to their successful business. Emma was immediately the center of attention, passed from Sarah to William and back again, cooed over and bounced. The baby thrived under the attention, her happy gurgles filling the room. Elizabeth watched Ethan carefully as he took in his surroundings. He seemed ill at ease among the fine furnishings, his large frame awkward on the delicate parlor chair. Yet his manners were impeccable, his conversation with William thoughtful and informed. As Sarah prepared supper, Elizabeth found a moment alone with her sister in the kitchen. "He's quite handsome, your cowboy," Sarah remarked, a knowing gleam in her eye. "He's not my cowboy," Elizabeth protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He simply helped us when we were stranded." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And then escorted you 3 days across dangerous territory out of the goodness of his heart?" "He's a good man. There aren't many left, from what I've seen." "And where is he bound?" Sarah asked, slicing bread with practiced efficiency. Oregon Territory. He wants land of his own. Elizabeth busied herself with setting plates, avoiding her sister's perceptive gaze. Was all Sarah said, but the sound contained volumes. Supper was a pleasant affair, with William drawing Ethan out about his experiences on cattle drives and his thoughts on the best ranching terrain. Elizabeth found herself watching Ethan's hands as he spoke, strong, capable hands that had mended her wagon, held her daughter, offered silent support when grief overwhelmed her. "And what awaits you in Oregon, Mr. Thornton?" Sarah asked, her innocent tone fooling no one but the men at the table. Ethan set down his fork carefully. "A fresh start, Mrs. Phillips. Land of my own to work. Maybe build something that lasts." "Alone?" The question slipped out before Elizabeth could stop it. His eyes met hers across the table. That was the plan. The air between them hummed with unspoken possibilities. William, oblivious to the undercurrents, launched into a discussion about business opportunities in Helena. "We're a growing town, Thornton. Good folk here, steady commerce. A man with your capabilities could do well." "I appreciate the thought," Ethan replied, his eyes still on Elizabeth. "But I've had my fill of working other men's dreams. Time for my own." After dinner, William insisted on showing Ethan his workshop behind the store, leaving the sisters alone with Emma, who had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. "He loves you," Sarah said without preamble. "Don't be ridiculous," Elizabeth sputtered. "We barely know each other." "Some souls recognize each other instantly," Sarah said with the confidence of a woman happily married. "I saw it the moment he looked at you." "I'm a widow with a child. He's a man with dreams of his own land. Those paths don't naturally converge." Sarah placed the sleeping Emma in her cradle. "Unless you want them to." She took Elizabeth's hands in hers. "Lizzie, I know you loved James, but he would want you to be happy, to find love again." "It's too soon," Elizabeth whispered, though even as she said it, she questioned the truth of her words. "Is it? Or are you afraid?" Before Elizabeth could answer, the men returned. The conversation turned to lighter topics, but throughout the evening Elizabeth felt Ethan's gaze returning to her, as if memorizing her features. When it was time to retire, William showed Ethan to the small guest room. Elizabeth lay awake long into the night, listening to Emma's soft breathing and the unfamiliar sounds of the town. Tomorrow, Ethan would leave. The thought left an emptiness she hadn't expected. Morning arrived too quickly. Elizabeth dressed with particular care, choosing her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton that James had always said matched her eyes. She pinned her hair neatly, then chided herself for such vanity. What did it matter how she looked for a goodbye? Downstairs, she found Ethan already prepared for departure, his saddlebags packed, his hat in his hands. He stood speaking with William, but his conversation halted when she entered the room. "Good morning," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Porter." He nodded, formal in a way he hadn't been on the trail. "I was just thanking your brother-in-law for the hospitality." "Surely you're not leaving before breakfast?" she asked, dismayed at the thought. "Best get an early start. It's a long journey west." William excused himself tactfully, leaving them alone in the front parlor. "I don't know how to thank you," Elizabeth began, hating the inadequacy of the words. "What you did for Emma and me." "Anyone would have done the same," he interrupted, his fingers working the brim of his hat. "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. You." She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I wish you well in Oregon, Ethan Thornton." He looked down at her, his expression unguarded for once. "And I wish you happiness here, Elizabeth Porter." The moment stretched between them, full of words unsaid. "I should go," he finally murmured, settling his hat on his head. "Yes," she agreed, though everything in her rebelled at the word. He moved toward the door, then paused. That day on the road, when I said I'd be the one to hold you both, I meant it. Not just then, but... He shook his head. Doesn't matter now. You're safe with family. What if I don't want just safety? The words escaped before she could censor them. Ethan turned slowly, hope and caution warring in his eyes. What are you saying, Elizabeth? I'm saying. She took a deep breath. I'm saying that Emma and I would be fortunate to have a man like you in our lives. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cradle her face with exquisite tenderness. I have nothing to offer but hard work and devotion, he said roughly. No home yet, no certainties. Those are the only things that matter, she whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but deepened as she responded. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with emotion. Come with me, he said, the words a plea and a promise. To Oregon. We'll build something together, a home, a life. Fear and excitement battled within her. I hardly know you, she protested weakly. You know what matters, he countered. You've seen me at my truest on the trail, under the stars, facing challenges together. The rest we'll learn day by day, year by year. Emma's cry from upstairs broke the moment. Elizabeth pulled away reluctantly. I need to think. This isn't just my life, it's Emma's too. Ethan nodded, stepping back. I understand. I'll delay my departure until tomorrow. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. The day passed in a haze for Elizabeth. She helped Sarah in the shop, played with Emma, discussed her options with her sister, but all the while, her mind circled back to Ethan, to his steadiness, his integrity, the way he'd held Emma that first day when her cries pierced the lonely Montana air. What would you do? She asked Sarah as they closed the shop that evening. Sarah leaned against the counter, considering. I'd ask myself where I feel most alive, most myself. With James, it was here, building a life with William. But your path might lead elsewhere. She squeezed Elizabeth's hand. You've always been the brave one, Lizzie. Trust that. That night, after tucking Emma into bed, Elizabeth sat by the window, watching the stars emerge over Helena. The town offered security, family, familiar comforts. Oregon was unknown territory physically and emotionally. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, his expression conflicted. I couldn't leave without saying what's in my heart, he said quietly. I know it's sudden, maybe even foolish, but I've never been more certain of anything. He took her hand gently. When I found you on that road, something changed in me. I'd been wandering for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But seeing you there, so determined despite everything, I realized I'd been waiting my whole life to find something worth stopping for. Elizabeth's heart thundered in her chest. Ethan, let me finish, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I'm not asking you to love me right away. That'll come in its own time if it's meant to. I'm asking you to trust me, to let me prove every day that I can be the man you and Emma deserve. Tears blurred her vision. I'm afraid, she admitted, of making another mistake, of uprooting Emma, of following a dream that might vanish like morning mist. That's fair, he acknowledged. But know this, I will never abandon you. Whether we're together or apart, my word is my bond. He released her hand and stepped back. Sleep on it. I'll abide by whatever you decide. After he left, Elizabeth moved to the cradle where Emma slept peacefully. Her daughter's tiny features were relaxed in sleep, trusting and vulnerable. What should we do, little one? She whispered. Stay in safety or risk everything for a new beginning. Emma's only answer was a soft sigh in her sleep. Elizabeth barely slept that night, weighing options, imagining futures, questioning her own heart. By dawn, exhaustion had given way to clarity. She knew what she wanted, what she needed to do. She dressed Emma carefully, packed their few belongings, and wrote a letter to Sarah explaining her decision. Then she went downstairs to find Ethan. He was in the stable behind the shop, preparing his horse for departure. He looked up at her approach, his expression guarded until he saw the small traveling bag in her hand and Emma in her arms. "You're coming," he said, disbelief and joy mingling in his voice. "We're coming," she corrected, smiling as Emma reached for him instinctively. "If the offer still stands." Ethan crossed to them in 3 long strides, enfolding them both in his arms. "It stands for as long as I draw breath," he promised. "Elizabeth Porter, I will spend my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I already know I won't," she said with newfound certainty. Sarah and William appeared in the stable doorway, summoned by the commotion. To Elizabeth's surprise, Sarah didn't seem shocked by her decision. "You knew," Elizabeth accused gently. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I saw your face when you looked at him. It's the same way I look at William." She embraced her sister tightly. "Write to us. Visit when you can. Be happy, Lizzie." William shook Ethan's hand firmly. "Take care of them, Thornton. They're precious to us." "With my life," Ethan vowed. The goodbyes were tearful but filled with hope. By mid-morning they were on the road west, Ethan on his horse, Elizabeth and Emma in the wagon loaded with supplies that William had insisted they take. "It's about a month's journey to where I'm headed," Ethan explained as Helena disappeared behind them. "Willamette Valley. They say it's the most fertile land in the territory." "Tell me about it," Elizabeth requested, wanting to picture the home they would build. As they traveled, Ethan described rolling hills covered in rich grass, forests teeming with game, rivers full of fish, and soil so fertile that anything planted would flourish. His enthusiasm was contagious, painting a vision of prosperity and peace that made the long journey ahead seem worthwhile. The days blended together as they moved west, crossing rivers, navigating mountain passes, traversing vast plains. They joined a small wagon train for part of the journey, finding safety in numbers. Elizabeth's skills as a teacher made her popular among the families traveling with children, while Ethan's wilderness knowledge earned him respect among the men. At night, after Emma was asleep, they would sit by the fire and talk, learning each other's histories, dreams, fears. Elizabeth told him about meeting James at a church social, their simple wedding, their hopes for a family. Ethan shared stories of his childhood in Texas, his time in the Confederate Army despite being underage, the aimless years after losing his sister and her family. "I never thought I'd find home in a person," he admitted one night, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Always thought it had to be a place." "And now?" she asked, her heart quickening at his touch. "Now I know better." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Home is where you and Emma are. Everything else is just scenery." They were married by a traveling preacher they encountered at a trading post in Idaho Territory. It was a simple ceremony, with strangers as witnesses and wildflowers as Elizabeth's bouquet. Emma, now crawling and babbling, watched from the arms of the trading post owner's wife, reaching out occasionally for Ethan, who she'd come to recognize as a source of safety and affection. "I, Ethan James Thornton, take you, Elizabeth Ann Porter, as my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, until death parts us." When Elizabeth repeated the vows, adding, "and to love and cherish our daughter Emma as your own," tears glistened in Ethan's blue eyes. "I already do," he whispered for her ears alone. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and their fellow travelers celebrated with what little luxuries they had. Coffee sweetened with precious sugar, dried fruit saved for special occasions, music from a fiddle someone produced from their wagon. That night, in the privacy of a small room the trading post owner insisted they take, Elizabeth and Ethan came together as husband and wife. His tenderness moved her to tears, his patience as she overcame her initial shyness, his whispered words of admiration and desire. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes." Afterward, lying in his arms with Emma sleeping peacefully nearby, Elizabeth felt a contentment she hadn't dared hope for after James's death. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something new and equally precious. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his fingers trailing lazily through her unbound hair. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" His arms tightened around her. "More than I knew possible." The final leg of their journey took them through the magnificent Columbia River Gorge and into the Willamette Valley. When they crested the final hill and the valley spread before them, green and lush under the summer sun, Elizabeth gasped at its beauty. "You didn't exaggerate," she breathed, taking in the rolling landscape, the distant mountains, the ribbon of river shimmering in the sunlight. Ethan's arm slipped around her waist. "This is where we'll build our life," he said, confidence and pride in his voice. "Right there." He pointed to a gentle slope near the river, sheltered by a stand of tall pine trees. Good water access, protected from the north wind, fertile soil all around. "It's perfect," she agreed, imagining a cabin there, gardens, perhaps a swing for Emma and the siblings they might give her one day. The land claim process took time, but Ethan's military service gave them preference. By autumn, they had the deed to 300 acres of prime valley land. Neighbors helped raise a sturdy cabin before the winter rains set in a tradition of the frontier that Elizabeth found deeply moving. Strangers coming together, working from sunrise to sunset, creating a home for newcomers because someday they might need the same help. Their first winter was challenging but sweet. The cabin was snug, their supplies adequate, and Emma thrived in the stable environment. She took her first steps on Christmas Day, toddling from Elizabeth to Ethan with determined concentration, collapsing into his waiting arms with a squeal of delight. Ethan scooped her up, tossing her gently as she giggled. "That's my girl," he said proudly. "Brave, just like your mama." Elizabeth watched them together, this man who had claimed a child not his by blood, but completely his by choice, and felt her heart might burst with love. "She adores you," she observed. "The feeling's mutual," Ethan replied, settling Emma on his knee. He met Elizabeth's eyes over their daughter's head. "I never thought I'd have this. A family, a purpose beyond just surviving." Elizabeth crossed to them, placing her hand on his cheek. "Neither did I. Not after James." She leaned down to kiss him softly. "Thank you for stopping that day." "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips. Spring brought new beginnings. Ethan planted their first crops while Elizabeth started a garden and tended to the few chickens and goats they'd acquired. They worked side by side, building their dream acre by acre. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch Ethan had added to the cabin, watching Emma explore the yard, listening to the chorus of frogs and crickets, planning their future together. "I thought we might add a room next year," Ethan mentioned one such evening, his arm around Elizabeth as they shared the porch swing. "Emma will need her own space eventually." "Sooner than that, perhaps," Elizabeth said carefully, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat abdomen. Ethan went very still, his eyes widening as he understood her meaning. "Elizabeth, are you certain?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Come December, if my calculations are correct." His whoop of joy startled a nearby flock of birds into flight. He lifted her from the swing, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? Are you feeling well? Do you need anything?" Elizabeth laughed, touching his worried face. "I'm fine, my love. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," he said with fierce protectiveness. "Not carrying my child." The possessive pride in his voice warmed her. "Our child," she corrected gently. "Just as Emma is ours now." Ethan knelt to gather Emma into their embrace. "Did you hear that, little one? You're going to be a big sister." As their second summer in Oregon bloomed around them, Elizabeth watched her family flourish. Ethan's crops grew strong in the fertile soil. Their small herd of cattle increased, and trading relationships with neighbors ensured they wanted for nothing essential. Emma, now nearly 2, chattered constantly and followed Ethan everywhere, helping with chores in her determined toddler way. Elizabeth's pregnancy progressed without complications. Her body rounded, her skin glowed, and Ethan's attentiveness bordered on excessive, bringing her wildflowers, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day, reading to her from the few books they owned as she sewed tiny garments for the coming baby. On a crisp December morning, with snow dusting the valley floor, Elizabeth's labor began. Ethan rode frantically for the midwife who lived 3 miles away, returning with the calm, experienced woman who had delivered most of the children in the valley. "First babies usually take their time," Mrs. Abernathy assured Ethan as she shooed him from the bedroom. "Go tend to little Emma. We'll call when there's news." The hours crawled by as Elizabeth labored. Ethan paced the main room of their cabin, telling stories to Emma with one ear always tuned to the sounds from the bedroom. When Elizabeth's cries intensified, he flinched as if physically struck. "Mama hurt?" Emma asked, her small face creased with worry. Ethan gathered her close. "Mama's working very hard to bring your brother or sister into the world," he explained. "It hurts, but it's a good kind of hurt, because something wonderful comes after." Finally, as twilight descended, a new cry joined the household, strong and indignant. Ethan froze, Emma still in his arms, as the midwife appeared in the doorway. Her apron stained, but her face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Thornton. You have a fine son." Ethan's legs nearly buckled with relief and joy. "And Elizabeth?" "Tired but well. She's asking for you both." He carried Emma into the bedroom where Elizabeth lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as they entered, her smile encompassing her entire family. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, settling Emma beside him. Together, they peered at the tiny red face with its shock of dark hair Ethan's coloring. Elizabeth noted with pleasure. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, a finger gently tracing his son's cheek. "What shall we call him?" "I thought perhaps James," Elizabeth suggested, watching his face carefully. "James Ethan Thornton." Emotion tightened Ethan's features. "You would name him for your first husband?" "For a good man who would be happy to know his daughter is loved and protected," Elizabeth clarified, "and for the man who made our family complete." Ethan bent to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. "James Ethan it is, then." Emma patted the bundle curiously. "Baby?" she questioned. "Yes, sweetheart, your brother," Elizabeth confirmed. "Can you say James?" "Jame," Emma declared triumphantly. Their laughter mingled in the warm room as snow began falling more heavily outside, blanketing their homestead in pristine white, a clean canvas for their future. 5 years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. The farm prospered under Ethan's careful management, expanding to include an orchard, more livestock, and additional acreage. Elizabeth gave birth to another son, Samuel, and then a daughter they named Sarah after Elizabeth's sister. Emma, now 7, attended the small schoolhouse that had been built as more families settled in the valley. She inherited her mother's love of learning and her stepfather's determination, often reading by candlelight, long after she should have been asleep. One evening, as the family gathered around the hearth after supper, Ethan carving a wooden horse for James, Elizabeth mending clothes, the children playing on the rug, Emma looked up from her book with a thoughtful expression. "Papa," she said, addressing Ethan as she had since she could speak, "Mrs. Layton said today that families are made by blood. But you're not my blood, Papa, are you?" The room fell silent. Elizabeth and Ethan exchanged glances, having anticipated this question eventually but unprepared for it tonight. Ethan set aside his carving and patted his knee. Emma came to him readily, settling into his lap though she was getting almost too big for such gestures. "Blood is one way families are made," he agreed, his deep voice gentle. "But there are others just as strong. Your mama and I chose each other, and I chose you from the first moment I saw you." "When was that?" Emma asked, curious rather than upset. Ethan's eyes met Elizabeth's over their daughter's head, sharing the memory. "You were just a tiny baby, crying by the roadside. Your mama's wagon had broken down, and you were hungry and tired." "What did you do?" Emma prompted. "I stopped to help," he said simply. "And when I held you in my arms, something happened in my heart. I knew I wanted to take care of you forever." "What did you say?" Emma persisted, enjoying the story. Ethan smiled at the memory. "I said, then I'll be the one to hold you both." "And he has?" Elizabeth added softly. "Every day since." Emma considered this seriously. "So families can be made by choosing too?" "The strongest ones often are," Ethan confirmed. "James, Samuel, and Sarah came to us one way. You came another. But you're all equally our children, equally loved." Emma nodded, satisfied. "I'm glad you chose us, Papa." "Best choice I ever made," he assured her, hugging her close. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Elizabeth and Ethan stood on the porch of their now expanded home, looking out over the moonlit valley that had become their kingdom. "You handled that beautifully," Elizabeth said, leaning into her husband's embrace. Emma needed to hear it that way. "It's the simple truth," Ethan replied, his chin resting on her head. "That day changed everything for me. I was just drifting, convinced I'd never find a place to belong." His arms tightened around her. "Then I found you both, crying by the road, and suddenly I had purpose." Elizabeth turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face, more weathered now, with strands of silver at his temples, but still handsome, still the face that made her heart quicken after all these years. "Do you ever regret it? Taking on another man's widow and child?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "Elizabeth Thornton, in all our years together, I have regretted many things: not building the roof pitch steep enough on the barn, planting wheat in the north field that first year, letting James have that pony before he was ready, but never, not for one single moment, have I regretted finding you and Emma. Even when I burned your favorite shirt trying to iron it?" she teased, remembering her domestic disasters in their early days. "Even then," he assured her, laughter warming his voice, "though it was a very good shirt." "I'll make you another," she promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. His response was immediate and ardent, his hands sliding down to her waist with familiar intimacy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Elizabeth. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. And I love you, Ethan Thornton. My cowboy who stopped when no one else would." They stood together a moment longer, savoring the quiet perfection of the life they'd built from an unlikely beginning, her baby crying alone by the road, his simple pledge to hold them both, and all the thousands of moments since that had forged their family, their legacy, their enduring love. Behind them, their home stood solid and welcoming, filled with sleeping children who would carry their story forward. Before them stretched the land they'd tamed together, promising sustenance and prosperity for generations to come. And between them flowed the love that had begun with an act of kindness on a lonely Montana road, growing stronger with each passing day, each shared challenge, each quiet triumph, a love born of choice rather than chance. A love that had transformed two broken paths into one extraordinary journey,